For decades, the United States and the European Union stood as the strongest partners in the world. They built NATO together, defended each other in times of crisis, and shaped the global economy with free trade. But today, that partnership is being tested like never before. The reason? Tariffs. What started as an America First campaign promise has turned into a full-blown trade war across the Atlantic. Washington accuses Europe of unfair trade practices, while Brussels fires back with its own tariffs, targeting American industries. Suddenly, allies are treating each other like rivals. The headlines say it all: United States shocked by European Union decision after Trump's tariff crackdown. The trade war wasn't just about politicians making speeches. Real industries, workers, and consumers were caught in the crossfire. Take the auto industry. Germany's car makers, brands like BMW, Volkswagen, and Mercedes, depend heavily on the American market. They even built factories in the United States to create local jobs. But the threat of new tariffs on cars shook the entire sector. A single tariff increase could raise prices for American buyers while cutting profits for European companies, a lose-lose scenario. Steel and aluminum were another flashpoint. When the United States slapped tariffs on European metals, Europe hit back with its own duties. The result? Higher costs for manufacturers on both sides. For every steelworker supposedly protected, hundreds of downstream jobs in industries like construction and machinery faced higher input costs. Agriculture and symbolic goods also took a hit. Europe deliberately targeted United States farm exports, whiskey, and even motorcycles from iconic brands like Harley-Davidson. These weren't chosen at random. They were aimed at industries tied to politically sensitive states. Farmers and factory owners suddenly saw markets shrink, and many began asking why they were being dragged into a fight with allies instead of rivals like China. In the end, costs rippled through the economy. Businesses delayed investments, supply chains grew more expensive, and consumers faced higher prices. The longer the trade war dragged on, the clearer it became. Both sides were bleeding, even if the wounds looked different. The fallout from the tariff war wasn't limited to trade numbers or product prices. It began to shake something far deeper: the foundations of the Western alliance itself. For decades, NATO symbolized trust and unity between the United States and Europe. They stood shoulder to shoulder on defense spending, countering Russian influence and handling crises in the Middle East. But when Washington started treating Europe as an economic adversary, that sense of solidarity began to erode. European leaders started talking more about strategic autonomy, the idea that Europe should build its own independent defense and economic policies instead of relying too heavily on the United States. For some, the tariffs were proof that Washington could no longer be fully trusted. This shift created opportunities for America's rivals. Russia welcomed every sign of division in NATO, hoping it would weaken transatlantic unity. China also stood to gain, as it could expand its trade networks and present itself as a more reliable partner while the West quarreled. And perhaps most damaging of all, the shared values that once defined the alliance, free markets, democracy, and cooperation, were being overshadowed by nationalist rhetoric and protectionism. If allies start seeing each other as threats, even just economically, how long before that mistrust bleeds into security and diplomacy? In other words, the trade war wasn't just about tariffs. It was about the credibility of the Western alliance itself. As the United States and Europe dig into their positions, the big question is, where does this end? There are three possible futures. Future 1, escalation. Both sides keep raising tariffs, targeting more industries, and hardening their political stance. This could spiral into a full-blown trade war, where businesses collapse, consumer prices skyrocket, and diplomatic ties fray beyond repair. In this path, the losers are not just workers and companies, but the entire global economy. Future 2, cold peace. Here, the United States and Europe maintain defense cooperation through NATO, but economically they treat each other more like competitors than partners. Tariffs remain in place, trade flows shrink, and mistrust lingers. This scenario avoids collapse, but it locks the Western alliance into a tense, uneasy coexistence. Future 3, reset. This is the most optimistic scenario. Leaders on both sides recognize that the costs of conflict are greater than the political benefits. They step back, renegotiate deals, and create new frameworks for cooperation. maybe even reforming institutions like the World Trade Organization to prevent future clashes. It wouldn't erase past tensions, but it could rebuild trust and stabilize the partnership. The path chosen will depend less on economic logic and more on politics. If populist pressures dominate, escalation is likely. If cooler heads prevail, compromise and a reset remain possible. At this stage, the Western alliance isn't broken, but it's standing at a crossroads, and the next choices will decide whether it weakens or recovers. So, is this the end of the Western alliance? Not yet. But the foundation has cracks, and every new tariff makes them wider. The United States and Europe still share NATO. They still face common threats like Russia, and they still represent nearly half of the world's economy. These are powerful bonds that won't vanish overnight, but alliances are built on trust, and trust is much harder to rebuild once it's lost. What makes this moment so dangerous is that the fight is being driven more by politics than by economics. Tariffs are framed as victories for domestic audiences, even while they damage industries and raise prices. Populism rewards short-term wins, but in the long run, it risks breaking apart decades of cooperation. If Washington and Brussels cannot find a path back to compromise, the costs will spread beyond their borders. Rivals like China and Russia are already positioning themselves to benefit from Western disunity. And ordinary people, farmers, factory workers, and consumers, will keep paying the price for political battles they didn't start. The future of the alliance will depend on whether leaders are willing to sacrifice some popularity at home for the sake of stability abroad. History shows the West has weathered crises before, from wars in the Balkans to the Iraq invasion, but never has it been this divided over trade. The Western alliance isn't broken, but the window to repair it is closing fast. The choice now is clear: rebuild trust and cooperation, or risk letting one of the most successful partnerships in modern history unravel in real time.